The ground beneath your feet is a lie. It feels solid and permanent, but it is actually a dynamic puzzle of colossal plates constantly jostling for position. The true story of our continents is not one of slow, graceful drift, but of violent, forgotten ruptures that fundamentally rewired the world map. This journey will unearth 21 of these hidden fault lines, the planet's secret architects. You will discover how subterranean forces you never learned about silently tore ancient supercontinents in half, forged entirely new oceans, and sculpted the coastlines we recognize today. We will travel from the depths of a single, massive landmass to the birth of the seaways that divide our modern world. How did a crack in the Earth's crust isolate an entire continent and trigger an ice age? What forgotten fracture zone nearly split North America in two? By the end, your perception of the ground beneath you will be forever changed. What does it feel like to learn the world you know was built on a foundation of secrets? Think of a hairline crack in a dinner plate, a tiny flaw you might not even notice until pressure makes it split completely. This is the essence of a fault line, but on a scale so immense it defies everyday understanding. These are not mere cracks in the ground. They are deep, fundamental fractures in the Earth's rigid outer shell, the places where colossal blocks of our planet meet and move. That movement can be terrifyingly sudden, unleashing the destructive power of an earthquake. More often, though, it is an agonizingly slow and silent creep, a relentless push or slide that shifts entire continents a few inches each year. Over millions of years, those inches become thousands of miles, redrawing the world map in a process too gradual for any single lifetime to perceive. These hidden seams are the planet's architectural blueprints, the lines along which it is constantly being rebuilt. To see their ultimate power, we must journey back to a time before these fractures even existed, to a world that was one. Picture a single, staggering landmass, a supercontinent called Pangaea, where you could walk from what is now Brazil to Nigeria without getting your feet wet. This was the world, whole and unbroken, just before the hidden architects began their work. This unified world created a living map unlike any we see today. The interior of Pangaea was a land of extremes, a place of vast, sun-scorched deserts where seasonal monsoons were the only respite. Along the coasts, lush forests of primitive conifers and ferns thrived, while the first mammals scurried in the undergrowth, tiny pioneers in a giant's world. Because all the land was connected, a species could migrate and spread across distances that are now separated by entire oceans. The fossil record tells this story perfectly. Identical skeletons of a land reptile called Lystrosaurus have been unearthed in Antarctica, South Africa, and India. How could the same heavy, non-swimming creature end up on continents now separated by thousands of miles of open sea? The only logical answer is that those continents were once fused together. Yet this continental paradise was a pressure cooker. The very mantle of the Earth was restless beneath the colossal weight of the supercontinent. Like a blanket that is too thick, Pangaea trapped the planet's internal heat, building up unimaginable subterranean forces that strained against the single, unbroken crust. This serene unity was an illusion, a temporary calm before a geological storm that would shatter the world. The first tier did not begin with a bang, but with a slow, relentless stretch in the east. A weak spot in the crust, a line of future destiny, began to sag and thin, creating a vast, sinking valley. This was the birth pang of the Tethys Sea, the initial rupture that would set in motion the complete rewiring of the planet. That first, slow stretch in the east was the beginning of the end for the unified world. It triggered a chain reaction of continental movement, a planetary dance of collision and destruction that left a permanent scar. Deep within the spine of the Alps and the towering peaks of the Himalayas lies evidence of this epic closure, a geological wound known as the Tethyan Suture. This is not a simple crack you can point to on a map. It is a vast, complex zone, a tangled web of rock that marks where the ancient Tethys Ocean met its fate. For millions of years, the supercontinents of Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south drifted toward each other, with the Tethys between them. The ocean had no escape. Its entire seafloor was slowly, inexorably forced downward, sliding beneath the continental margins and back into the planet's molten mantle. Think of it as the world's largest conveyor belt, dragging an entire ocean basin into a subterranean forge. As the seafloor vanished, the two giant landmasses finally crashed together. The force of that collision was beyond comprehension. It was like two continents slamming into each other in ultra-slow motion. The crust at their edges crumpled, fractured, and was thrust upward, layer upon layer, building the most magnificent mountain ranges on Earth. The Tethyan Suture is the colossal zipper that closed the Tethys Ocean forever. This suturing process did more than just build mountains. It permanently welded together disparate fragments of the ancient world. It stitched together a new geological tapestry, creating the complex foundation of modern southern Europe and all of Asia. The disappearance of the Tethys was one of the most profound rewiring events in our planet's history, permanently altering global climate and ocean currents. And as this ancient ocean was being consumed in the east, a monumental tear was beginning to rip through the west. While the Tethys was closing in the east, the supercontinent's western heartland was being torn apart by fire. This second forgotten fault was not a single crack but a catastrophic volcanic bleeding that heralded the birth of an ocean. Known as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or CAMP, this event was a geological cataclysm on a scale we can barely fathom. Roughly 201 million years ago, the crust between what would become North America and Northwest Africa began to fail. But it did not just split, it erupted. For hundreds of thousands of years, the land was flooded with unimaginable quantities of lava, covering an area larger than the entire continent of Europe today. This was the planet's crust screaming under the strain, a fiery rupture that marked the true beginning of the end for Pangaea. The cause was a colossal upwelling of heat from the deep mantle, a superheated plume that made the lithosphere dome upward like a giant blister. The land stretched and thinned until it could take no more, finally fracturing along a network of faults. These fractures became the weak points through which the planet's inner fire poured forth, a volcanic event so immense it is suspected of triggering a mass extinction that wiped out vast numbers of species. Yet from this planetary trauma, a new world was forged. The faults of the CAMP are the forgotten birth pangs of the Atlantic Ocean, the initial, violent tear that would ultimately propagate northward. This first rupture created a seaway that began the permanent rewiring of the northern hemisphere, isolating continents and setting them on their own solitary paths for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. That fiery ambition in the central Atlantic did not stop there. It sent a northern branch snaking up between what is now Canada and Greenland, a fracture with its own grand design known as the Labrador Sea Rift. For millions of years during the Cretaceous period, this fault was alive, a true spreading center actively pulling the land apart. A narrow seaway began to form, and Greenland started its slow, deliberate drift away from North America. It seemed a new ocean basin was being born, destined to permanently separate the two landmasses. Yet this tectonic ambition was ultimately abandoned. The forces driving the continents apart waned. The subterranean engine of magma that fueled the rift simply shut down. The spreading center failed, falling dormant and leaving its work unfinished. Today, the Labrador Sea Rift is a ghost of geology, a buried structure hidden deep beneath the cold waters of the sea that bears its name. It is a forgotten fault line that almost rewrote the map of the North Atlantic. Had it succeeded, the eastern coastline of Canada would be unrecognizable, carved into a new, complex shape. More profoundly, the entire system of ocean currents that moderates the climate of northern Europe, the North Atlantic Current, might have taken a completely different and colder path, potentially altering the environmental history of the entire hemisphere. This abandoned rift is a powerful reminder that the planet's rewiring is not a predetermined script. It is a process of trial and error, where some fractures become the seams of new oceans while others are simply dead ends. And as this northern rift failed, a southern tier was succeeding on a truly spectacular scale. The Atlantic's northern separation was a story of fiery ambition and abandoned rifts, but its southern opening was a far more complex negotiation. The ocean did not simply unzip from top to bottom. Instead, its progress was dictated by ancient, pre-existing weaknesses in the planet's crust, forcing the continents to tear apart in a messy, staggered process. This is where the Romanche fracture zone enters the story, a monumental transform fault that acts like a massive geological zipper near the equator. It is a deep, linear valley in the ocean floor that offsets the mid-Atlantic ridge, creating a dramatic zigzag in the very spine of the Atlantic. This was not a clean break, but a necessary pivot. As South America and Africa pulled away from each other, their coastlines did not match up perfectly for a straight separation. The Romanche fracture zone accommodated this awkward geometry, acting as a sliding boundary that allowed the two landmasses to rotate slightly relative to one another. It was the crucial, complex hinge without which the southern Atlantic could not have opened successfully. Think of trying to pull apart two pieces of torn paper, their jagged edges catching on each other. The Romanche zone was the point where they slid past one another, releasing the tension and allowing the final separation. This forgotten fault proves that continental drift is never a clean break, but a messy divorce dictated by the deep-seated scars of the Earth itself. And as this equatorial zipper finished its work, it locked the southern continents into their final positions, sealing the fate of the isolated landmass that was left behind. The final separation of South America from Africa was a messy, complex divorce, and the forces that tore them apart reached far to the south with even more profound consequences. There, the Agulhas-Falkland fracture zone was the master architect of a continental exile. This was not a single crack but a sprawling system of transform faults, a deep-seated geological pivot that guided the movements of three continents at once. As South America was pushed westward away from Africa, this fracture zone acted like a sliding door, allowing the southern tip of the Americas to swing clear of the Antarctic peninsula. It was a slow, grinding separation that would ultimately rewrite the entire planet's climate. This continental uncorking created the Drake Passage, a narrow but deep seaway between South America and Antarctica. For the first time in tens of millions of years, Antarctica was completely alone, surrounded by a continuous, unimpeded ocean. With no land to block its flow, the most powerful current on Earth was born, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. This relentless river of seawater, flowing endlessly from west to east, became a thermal moat, isolating the southern continent from the planet's warmer waters. The gentle climate that had once supported forests on Antarctica was now a memory. The continent began to freeze, its ice sheets growing until it became the vast, white desert we know today. This forgotten fault, hidden beneath the waves, did not just reshape the map, It literally plunged a continent into an ice age, locking away its ancient secrets under miles of ice. As one continent was being isolated and frozen, another ancient landmass was being violently ripped into pieces. No other continent has ever moved with such reckless speed. The Indian subcontinent, a colossal fragment of the ancient Gondwana supercontinent, broke free and raced northward as if pulled by an invisible force, crossing an entire ocean in a geological sprint. Its destiny was a collision of unimaginable force, and the first point of impact is marked by the Tethyan Himalaya thrust. This forgotten fault is the primary crumple zone, the exact line where the leading edge of India began to plunge beneath the southern margin of Asia. Think of it as the moment a car crashes into a wall in ultra-slow motion, its front end buckling and folding. That is precisely what happened to the Earth's crust here, starting around 50 million years ago and continuing without pause to this very day. The initial impact along this thrust fault was just the beginning. As India kept pushing, the crust had nowhere to go but up. The Tethyan Himalaya thrust acted as the master fault, a ramp that forced entire layers of rock to stack and uplift, creating the monumental wall of the Himalayas and the vast, high-altitude desert of the Tibetan Plateau. This single fault line did not just rewire a coastline, it built the roof of the world. The creation of this massive, elevated landscape altered the planet's weather systems, giving birth to the powerful monsoon cycles that shape life for billions of people. The force of that ongoing collision is so immense that it continues to push the Himalayas a little higher each year, a permanent monument to a forgotten fault's power. While India was crashing into Asia, other pieces of the shattered Gondwana supercontinent were embarking on their own solitary voyages across the globe. While India was crashing into Asia, a much cleaner and more surgical break was occurring to the west. The separation of Arabia from Africa is a masterclass in geological efficiency, and its story is written along the Owen fracture zone. This is not a volcanic wound or a crumpled suture, but a clean, linear scar hidden deep beneath the waves of the Arabian Sea. It functions as a massive transform fault, a boundary where two tectonic plates slide horizontally past one another. The Owen fracture zone was the crucial pivot point that allowed two major continental movements to happen at once. As India continued its relentless northward sprint, this fracture zone accommodated its movement while simultaneously allowing the Arabian plate to rotate counterclockwise, swinging like a door on a hinge away from the African mainland. This elegant sliding motion was the key that unlocked the Gulf of Aden, creating a new seaway and beginning the process that would form the Red Sea. This clean break did more than just shift a landmass. It created an entirely new continent in the form of the Arabian Peninsula, isolating the Horn of Africa and permanently altering the geography of the entire region. It is a stark reminder that not all continental ruptures are fiery cataclysms. Some are precise, calculated realignments, and as this surgical separation was finishing its work, a far more violent and visible tear was beginning to rip another continent in two. That slow, surgical separation of Arabia is a preview of a far more dramatic event unfolding to the south. The East African Rift is a continent tearing itself in two, a live broadcast of a process that once shattered Pangaea. This is not a hidden, ancient fault, but a sprawling, active network of fractures running for thousands of kilometers from the Horn of Africa deep into Mozambique. Here, the Earth's crust is actively stretching and thinning as the Somalian plate slowly pulls away from the larger Nubian plate. This relentless divergence has sculpted some of Africa's most iconic landscapes. It is the force behind the deep, sheer-walled valleys, the volcanic giants like Kilimanjaro that rise from the valley floor, and the vast, ancient lakes like Tanganyika, which fill the lowest points of the ever-widening chasm. This entire region is a living laboratory, a rare glimpse into the very first stages of continental breakup. The process is agonizingly slow, measured in millimeters per year, but over millions of years that steady pull will win. The rift will deepen, the land will sink, and the sea will eventually flood in, carving a new ocean and permanently severing the Horn of Africa from the mainland. This forgotten fault system proves that the planet's rewiring is an ongoing project, a blueprint still being drawn. As we witness a continent slowly rip apart in Africa, our journey moves to the Pacific, where a different kind of fracture has already reshaped an entire coastline. The grinding of the Pacific Plate against North America is a constant, low-frequency hum of continental transformation. While famous for its earthquakes, the San Andreas Fault's deeper, quieter work is the slow-motion dissection of a continent. This is a transform boundary, a place where two colossal plates slide horizontally past each other, neither diving into the mantle nor creating new land. Instead, they simply grind and transfer territory in a geological sleight of hand. The Pacific Plate is not just moving, it is carrying a passenger. The entire Baja California Peninsula and a significant slice of western Mexico are not truly part of the North American continent anymore. They are welded to the Pacific Plate, caught in its relentless northwesterly drift. This means that over millions of years, this fault has acted like a cosmic scalpel, slowly shearing off a sliver of the continent and sending it on a long, slow journey up the coastline. The city of Los Angeles, itself perched on the Pacific side of the fault, is physically moving closer to San Francisco at a rate comparable to the growth of your fingernails. While this seems imperceptible over tens of millions of years, this lateral shuffling can completely redraw a map, moving landmasses hundreds of miles. This is a fundamentally different kind of rewiring, not the fiery birth of an ocean or the crumpling of a mountain range, but the patient, horizontal transfer of real estate from one continental domain to another. The slow, grinding slide of the San Andreas is a modern process, but the continents hold far older, quieter scars. Deep beneath the worn-down ridges of the Appalachian Mountains in North America and the Caledonian Mountains of Scotland and Norway lies the ghost of an ocean. This was the Iapetus Ocean, a vast body of water that predated the Atlantic by hundreds of millions of years. Its existence is proven by a deeply buried fault zone known as the Iapetus Suture, the hidden scar where this ancient sea was completely erased. Long before Pangaea even existed, the Iapetus Ocean separated a cluster of ancient continents. For eons, it was a wide seaway, but the relentless dance of the plates would not allow it to last. The landmasses that would one day become North America, Greenland, and parts of Europe began to converge. The Iapetus Ocean, caught in the middle, had no place to go. Its entire seafloor was slowly consumed, forced downward into the Earth's mantle as the continents drew closer. The final collision was a slow-motion crash of staggering force, crumpling the edges of these ancient landmasses and pushing up a mighty mountain range that rivaled the modern Himalayas. The Appalachians and the Caledonides are not separate ranges. They are the two halves of the same long-eroded chain, torn apart only later by the opening of the Atlantic. The Iapetus Suture is the forgotten zipper that closed this ancient ocean and stitched the continents together, a permanent reminder that the map is always being rewritten. This deep history reveals a profound cycle. The assembly of a supercontinent like Pangaea requires the death of an ocean. The closure of the Iapetus Ocean was the necessary prelude to the creation of that unified world, proving that the planet's rewiring is an endless loop of creation and destruction. And just as one ocean vanished, another was destined to be born from its ashes. The assembly of Pangaea was a monumental event, but it was built upon a much older foundation. Long before the Atlantic began to open, the southern supercontinent of Gondwana was itself a patchwork of ancient landmasses, and the scars of its creation are etched into the very rock of Africa. The Mozambique Belt is a sprawling, complex tapestry of twisted and transformed rock that runs through the heart of East Africa and into Madagascar. This is not a single fault line but a vast, ancient collision zone, a geological archive of a continental union that happened over 600 million years ago. It marks the moment when several independent continental fragments, including pieces of what would become India, Antarctica, and Africa itself, were violently fused together. The force of that primeval collision was so immense that it generated incredible heat and pressure, cooking the existing rock and folding it into new, complex forms. This process of metamorphism created the stunning banded rocks we see today, a permanent record of a continent-building event that predates even the earliest dinosaurs. The Mozambique Belt reveals a profound truth about our planet. The rewiring of continents is not a one-time event but a deep time cycle. Every supercontinent is assembled upon the forgotten sutures of the one that came before it, and when it eventually breaks apart, the fragments carry that shared geological history with them like a family heirloom. This ancient African belt is the hidden proof that the continents we know were once strangers, forced together in a fiery embrace that laid the groundwork for the world we inhabit today. Australia's long, slow divorce from Antarctica required a final, decisive cut. That cut was made along the Tasman Fracture Zone, a sprawling network of transformed faults hidden beneath the wild Southern Ocean. As the Australian continent began its long, northward rotation, this fracture zone acted as a complex geological hinge. It was not a simple, clean break, but a zone of sliding and grinding that accommodated the different pivoting motions of the two massive continental blocks. This intricate dance was the final step in a process that had been unfolding for tens of millions of years. The ultimate rupture, which created the deep, abyssal plain of the Tasman Basin, was the moment of true severance. With that last connection broken, the Antarctic circumpolar current could now flow completely unimpeded around the entire globe. This final cut by the Tasman Fracture Zone plunged Australia into profound isolation. For millions of years, it drifted northward as a floating arc, a continent adrift. Shielded from the evolutionary pressures of the rest of the world, its ancient life forms were left to follow their own unique path. This is why Australia became a living museum of evolutionary history, a land of marsupials where mammals raised their young in pouches and where egg-laying mammals like the platypus persisted as living fossils. The forces that tear continents apart do not just create new oceans, they can also forge entire worlds of bizarre and wonderful life. And as one continent was set adrift to cultivate its strange menagerie, another type of geological force was building immense, submerged kingdoms from fire. Beneath the tranquil blue expanse of the Pacific lies a sunken kingdom of fire. The Ontong Java Plateau is not a fault line you can trace on a map, but a geological behemoth, a single, colossal slab of solidified lava larger than the entire state of Alaska. Formed in a cataclysmic volcanic pulse roughly 120 million years ago, this event was so immense it dwarfs every volcanic eruption in recorded human history combined. For a brief, fiery moment in the Cretaceous period, the very floor of the Pacific Ocean cracked open on a scale we can scarcely conceive, flooding the seabed with enough molten rock to create a new underwater continent. The formation of this plateau was a planetary-scale trauma. The sheer volume of lava displaced an enormous amount of ocean water, likely causing a dramatic, temporary rise in global sea levels that would have reshaped coastlines worldwide. The heat and gases released into the atmosphere would have triggered a profound climate shift, potentially warming the planet and altering weather patterns for centuries. This was rewiring on a systemic level, changing not just the shape of the seafloor, but the very chemistry of the air and the circulation of the oceans. How did such a massive structure form? Some scientists propose it is the scar of a head-on collision between a superheated mantle plume and a mid-ocean ridge, a direct hit of two of the planet's most powerful geological engines. Others speculate it could be a lost fragment of a continent, a piece of real estate that never quite made it to the surface. Whatever its origin, the Ontong Java Plateau stands as a humbling reminder that the most powerful architects of our world often work in utter silence, miles beneath the waves, building new foundations from pure volcanic fury. Far to the southwest, another piece of the planet is being methodically erased. The new Hebrides Trench is a deep gash in the ocean floor, a place where the Australian plate is slowly, inexorably diving beneath the smaller Pacific plate. But the true story here is not the victor, but the victim. This trench is the final chapter for a dying plate, the last visible evidence of a much larger oceanic plate that has almost completely vanished. Over millions of years, the vast majority of this plate has already been consumed, dragged down into the mantle and recycled into the Earth's interior. What we see today is merely the last sliver, the final page of a geological biography that is nearly finished. This forgotten fault is actively pulling the surrounding geography closer together. The immense suction of the subducting plate tugs on the island arcs of Vanuatu, crumpling their coastlines and fueling the volcanoes that build them. It is a modern, real-time demonstration of a fundamental truth. For new ocean floor to be born at spreading ridges, old ocean floor must be destroyed in trenches like this one. This consumption is a key part of the rewiring cycle, closing oceanic gateways and bringing continents into new collisions. The process is so forceful it can even spin entire blocks of crust. As the plate slides downward, it can create immense torque, twisting and rotating large segments of the Earth's crust like a slow-motion drill. These rotated blocks are a testament to the chaotic, grinding forces that operate where one piece of the world disappears forever, reshaping the map one swallowed mile at a time. A deep scar cuts straight through the Scottish Highlands, a clean, diagonal line that geography itself seems to obey. This is the Great Glen Fault, a geological seam that has shifted the very body of Scotland. The fault is a relic from the ancient Caledonian orogeny, that colossal crunch which built mountains from Scotland to the Appalachians. But the Great Glen's story did not end when those mountains were raised. Long after the main collision was over, this fault remained active, accommodating new pressures as the Atlantic Ocean began to stir. It functioned as a massive strike-slip fault, where one side grinds horizontally past the other. In this case, the northern block of the Scottish Highlands slid laterally past the southern block, shifting by hundreds of miles over millions of years. The evidence for this colossal slip is written in the rocks. Geologists find nearly identical formations and fossils on either side of the glen, but they are now separated by a vast distance, like two halves of the same page torn from a book and slid apart. This is the fine-tuning of continental geography, a later adjustment that further scrambles a landscape long after the main tectonic drama has concluded. It reveals that a continent's rewiring is not a single event, but a series of corrections and shifts that can continue for eons. While some faults like this one simply rearrange existing land, others perform a more radical act, carving entirely new microcontinents from the edges of the old. The birth of a new continent is not always a clean, decisive event. Sometimes it is a messy, violent separation that leaves a piece of the old world stranded in the middle of the new. This is the story of the Jan Mayen Fracture Zone, a complex network of forgotten faults in the frigid waters between Greenland and Norway. Here, the opening of the North Atlantic was not a simple, straight line. It was a chaotic triple junction, a place where three separate tectonic forces met and pulled the crust in different directions. In this geological tug of war, a sliver of the Greenland continental margin lost its anchor. It was stretched, thinned, and violently torn away from its parent landmass as the main Atlantic spreading center jumped to a new, more efficient location. Abandoned and isolated, this crustal fragment was left behind, a geological orphan adrift in a young ocean. Today, we know it as the Jan Mayen microcontinent, a hidden piece of continental crust submerged beneath the waves, with only the volcanic island of Jan Mayen peeking above the surface to mark its location. This forgotten fault system reveals a profound truth about how continents break apart. The process is not always a clean surgical cut, but can be a ragged tear that leaves behind evidence of the struggle. These microcontinents are the key witnesses to the intricate, chaotic details of continental divorce, showing us that the thinning and stretching of crust is the crucial, painful prelude to a final, irrevocable rupture. As continents tear and leave fragments adrift, other forces are busy assembling new land from the shattered pieces of the ancient world. Buried beneath the unimaginable weight of the East Antarctic ice sheet lies a secret so vast it defies the landscape above it. The Lambert Rift is not a mere crack, but one of the largest and deepest canyon systems on Earth, a colossal gash in the continent's bedrock that remains completely hidden from view. This is the ghost of a continental divorce that never quite happened. When India tore itself away from Antarctica and began its sprint northward, the crust did not break cleanly. The Lambert Rift was one of several arms of that separation, a major branch that started to open with the same world-changing ambition as the others. But here the process stalled. The stretching forces weakened and fell silent, leaving a monumental scar that never reached the ocean. What remains is a fossilized rift, a geological specimen preserved in ice. This hidden valley is a graben, a giant block of crust that dropped down between two parallel faults, creating a deep basin that has been collecting sediment for millions of years. It is a perfect frozen snapshot of the very first stages of continental breakup, a process that successfully tore other landmasses apart but here was left unfinished. By using ice-penetrating radar to peer through miles of ice, scientists can study this pristine structure, seeing exactly how a continent begins to tear without the complication of erosion or oceans obscuring the view. The Lambert Rift is a stark reminder that the planet's rewiring is full of abandoned plans and near misses. While Antarctica ultimately remained a single continent, this hidden valley proves it came perilously close to being split in two. Not all continental rearrangements are these slow, peaceful separations, however. Some are far more violent, involving the dramatic capture and assimilation of land from one continent to another. Northern Australia is not drifting peacefully toward Asia, it is crashing into it. The Banda Arc in eastern Indonesia is a spectacular, ongoing collision where the rules of geology are being rewritten before our eyes. Here, the leading edge of the Australian continent, a massive block of buoyant continental crust, is doing the unthinkable. It is being forced down into the Earth's mantle. Normally, continents are too light to subduct. They float like giant wooden rafts on the planet's dense interior. But in the Banda Arc, the immense, relentless push of the Australian plate is overcoming that natural buoyancy. The continental crust is being bent, fractured, and driven beneath the volcanic islands of the Banda Sea in a slow-motion dive of staggering proportions. This creates a tangled web of faults, a zone of intense pressure where the crust is actively crumpling, lifting the seafloor to form new islands and forging the Banda Trench, one of the deepest abysses in any ocean. This forgotten fault system is a breathtaking demonstration that continental rewiring is not always about clean breaks and drifting apart. It can also be about violent, messy mergers, the capture and assimilation of one landmass by another. This collision is actively building a new mountain range from the seabed up, a process we can witness in real time through the volcanoes and earthquakes that constantly shake the region. The most profound rewiring events, however, are not always this visible. Some of the planet's greatest shifts are recorded only in the faint, fossilized magnetism of ancient rock. The Pacific Ocean floor holds a magnetic memory of a world we can no longer see. Scattered across the northeastern Pacific are strange, misaligned magnetic stripes, like a barcode that has been torn and rearranged. These are the last traces of the Phoenix Plate, a once mighty tectonic plate that has almost completely vanished from the Earth's surface. For millions of years, the entire plate was steadily consumed, dragged downward into the mantle along a subduction zone that fed a long-vanished volcanic chain. The fracture zones that once marked its boundaries, the very seams of its existence, are now buried deep or have themselves been subducted, erased from the modern map. But as the seafloor spread, it recorded the planet's magnetic field in its cooling rock, preserving a ghostly imprint of the Phoenix Plate's final moments. Unraveling this magnetic cipher forced geologists to redraw their ancient maps of the Pacific. They realized the basin was not always dominated by the few large plates we see today. Instead, it was a more crowded, complex mosaic of smaller plates, a dynamic and ever-shifting jigsaw puzzle. The loss of the Phoenix Plate was not a minor event. Its destruction created a power vacuum of sorts, altering the balance of forces across the entire Pacific basin. The remaining plates, like the Pacific and Farallon plates, had to adjust their motions, their paths and speeds changing in response to the disappearance of their neighbor. This discovery of ghost plates reveals a profound truth about our planet's history. The geological record is inherently incomplete, a book with missing chapters. Entire oceans and continents have been recycled into the Earth's furnace, leaving behind only these subtle magnetic whispers. What other vanished plates are hidden in the rock, waiting for their magnetic stories to be read? This endless rewiring of the surface is driven by the restless engine of the Earth's deep interior, where heat and rock are in constant, slow motion. That relentless engine of change is not confined to the edges of the plates. Far below the continents, anchored deep within the mantle itself, lie forces that actively push and guide the land from beneath. The story of the Reunion hotspot is a testament to this deep-seated power, a tale of a stationary plume of fire that left a permanent scar across a moving continent. Picture a blowtorch held steady beneath a slow-moving sheet of wood. As the wood passes over the flame, it chars and burns, leaving a line of scorch marks. This is the essence of a hotspot, but on a planetary scale. The island of Reunion in the Indian Ocean, with its active Piton de la Fournaise volcano, is merely the current location of this fixed mantle plume. The true evidence of its power is written on the seafloor and most dramatically on the continent of India itself. Roughly 66 million years ago, as the Indian subcontinent was in the midst of its frantic sprint northward, it passed directly over this upwelling of intense heat. The result was not a simple volcano, but a cataclysm. The crust, stretched and fractured by the plume's heat, split open in a series of massive fissures, flooding the landscape with lava on an almost unimaginable scale. This event created the Deccan Traps, a vast volcanic province in western India that covers an area larger than the entire country of Germany. Layer upon layer of basalt lava piled up, in some places over 2,000 meters thick, burying the existing landscape under a smothering blanket of fire and rock. This was one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history, and its timing is chillingly close to the mass extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs. The sheer volume of gases and ash released into the atmosphere would have dramatically altered the global climate, casting a shadow over the planet for centuries. But the Réunion hotspot's impact was more than just destructive. The colossal upwelling of hot material from the mantle did not just melt the crust, it actively pushed against the bottom of the Indian plate. This massive, buoyant force likely acted like a geological turbocharger, further propelling India on its record-breaking journey north. The faulting and rifting associated with the Deccan Traps event fundamentally weakened the continental crust, perhaps making it easier for the plate to slide across the planet's surface. This forgotten connection reveals a profound truth. The drivers of continental drift are not solely the pull of subducting plates or the push from mid-ocean ridges. They can also be these deep, vertical plumes of heat that rise from the very edge of the Earth's core, actively guiding and accelerating a continent's trajectory. This is the planet's internal engine at work, a force that can both create and destroy, leaving a trail of islands and continental scars as its permanent record. Our journey ends not with a scar from the past, but with a glimpse of a future continent, a landmass being born before our eyes from the fires of this same deep Earth. East of Papua New Guinea, the planet is actively forging a new continent before our very eyes. The Woodlark Basin is a frantic, young spreading center, a place where the Earth's crust is tearing apart at a breakneck geological pace. Here, the Woodlark Plate is ripping itself away from the mighty Pacific Plate, and the associated fault systems are not just splitting oceanic crust, they are actively rifting the thick, buoyant continental crust of Papua New Guinea's eastern tip. This is the crucial first step, the stretching and thinning of a continent that precedes a final, dramatic rupture. You can witness the entire life cycle of an ocean basin in fast forward here, from the initial continental cracks to the birth of a new seaway. The land is being pulled so thin that it will eventually snap, allowing the ocean to flood in and permanently separate a sliver of the old continent, creating a brand new microcontinent. This is not a slow, ancient process relegated to deep time. It is a real-time, high-speed demonstration of the very same forces that, over millions of years, painstakingly opened the Atlantic Ocean. For geologists, the Woodlark Basin is an unprecedented living laboratory. They can observe the birth pangs of a new continental fragment, measuring the spreading rates, mapping the growing faults, and witnessing the volcanic activity that accompanies this colossal tearing. This active genesis brings our journey full circle, completing the list of 21 forgotten rewiring agents. It proves with stunning clarity that the story of continental drift is far from a finished chapter in a dusty textbook. The ground beneath our feet remains a dynamic, ever-changing blueprint, and the silent architects are still at work, redrawing the map for a future world we can only begin to imagine. These hidden fractures did far more than just move continents. They carved the very stage for human history. The rich copper and tin that define the Bronze Age were forged in the fiery crucibles of subduction zones, where one plate dives beneath another, melting rock and concentrating metals. The iron that built empires was similarly born from these immense geological pressures. Without these specific tectonic environments concentrating valuable ores, the technological progression of our species might have followed a completely different and slower path. The land itself was shaped to sustain us. The incredibly fertile soils that allowed the first agricultural revolutions to flourish in places like the Deccan Plateau in India or the highlands of Ethiopia are the direct result of millions of years of volcanic activity, their nutrients literally welling up from the planet's interior. The mountains that define nations were also raised by these forces. The Himalayas, a product of the colossal India-Asia collision, created a rain shadow that directs the life-giving monsoon rains, determining which regions could support dense populations and which would remain arid. These same mountain barriers channeled human movement, funneling migrations through specific passes and isolating cultures, allowing unique languages and traditions to develop in their secluded valleys. Even global trade was dictated by this deep geology. The strategic straits of Gibraltar and Hormuz, the navigable courses of great rivers like the Mississippi and the Ganges, and the protected natural harbors that grew into great port cities all exist because of the specific way the crust fractured, stretched, or collided eons ago. Every map of human civilization is, in truth, a faint tracing over a much older and more powerful map of tectonic scars. The ground we build upon is not a passive platform. It is the silent, fundamental director of our entire story, its ancient wounds guiding our fate from the world below. Our journey across these 21 forgotten fault lines reveals a planet in a state of perpetual, dynamic transformation. The ground we walk on is not a static stage, but a fluid and ever-changing blueprint. From the colossal collisions that built the Himalayas to the subtle, ongoing rift tearing Africa in two, the Earth's crust is a vast tapestry woven with the threads of these hidden scars. These fault lines were the silent architects that tore apart supercontinents like Pangaea, forged new oceans like the Atlantic, isolated entire ecosystems like Australia's, and ultimately sculpted the world map we study today. They remind us that the familiar contours of our continents are merely a single snapshot in a billion-year-long film of planetary change. What feels permanent to us is in geological time, fleeting and fluid, a temporary arrangement in an endless cycle of creation and destruction. I encourage you to look at a world map with new eyes, seeing not just countries and coastlines, but the ghostly outlines of past continents and the hidden forces that continue to rewire our world beneath the waves and under the ice. If this exploration of Earth's deep history fascinated you, please subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of our planet and share your thoughts on which forgotten fault line intrigued you the most in the comments below.